Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of our event. And we're going to start this morning with a welcome from Winsome Sears, the new Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. Founder and president of the Free Thinker Project, a nonprofit focused on inspiring a new generation of free thinkers that reject the divisive identity politics of the left. CJ also hosts the iHeartRadio podcast, CJ Pearson Uncensored, where he covers a wide range of current events without the fog and spin of the mainstream. And so CJ is going to talk with us about what's on his heart. The title of his talk is A Time for Choosing. Welcome CJ Pearson to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless America. How are you guys doing? Now, I know they may not say God bless America on the other side of the aisle, but we're in Nashville, God's country. We say God bless America. How are you guys doing? Well, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Swain. It's a pleasure to be here today, especially on such a momentous occasion, momentous weekend, leading into Monday. You know, what's interesting about this day, this weekend, this era, is that oftentimes people on the left like to stake a claim to the words of Martin Luther King Jr., but what we see today is anything but that truly, right? They think critical race theory is them living out his dream, but if you actually look at the words of Martin Luther King Jr., you see that it's anything but that. Martin Luther King told us to look at the contents of one character and not the color of their skin. Critical race theory is nothing more than just about skin, right? It's about teaching young people like me that we are perpetual victims, that we have someone to blame, someone to accuse of keeping us down. But I've got to say, I think my ancestors fought way too hard for me to blame the so-called white man for preventing me from being a victor, right? And that has been a choice that I've made intentionally because I would rather live on my feet than die on my knees. And that's just me. And I think that was Martin Luther King's dream fulfilled. He didn't want us to blame the world for our issues, but he wanted us to seek to better the world around us. And we see it around us today. We see a country that oftentimes it's easy to lose hope, right? You don't know what's going to really happen. You see inflation rising. You see a president who probably doesn't even know that he's president. He's just kind of there. He goes to the White House and he's like, oh, maybe I live here. And, you know, and that's concerning. And then you have Kamala Harris, which isn't even at all reassuring, right? And so it's like, wow, it is easy to lose hope. But I think that what we see around this country today, and I think this event speaks to it, is there are a lot of people who are waking up in America today, right? There are a lot of people who are rising up to the occasion and saying that I'm not going to lose this country, I'm going to fight for this country. And that is what we need now more than ever. We need people who are not going to be complacent. Not people who are going to sit on the sidelines. Not people who are going to just sit there and take it, but people who are going to fight back and say, this is wrong. And guess what? We need people who are not afraid to say unequivocally that they love America. When did that become a dirty word? When did patriot become a dirty word? To love America. This is the greatest country in the world. A shining city on a hill, a beacon of freedom and liberty. And I will never apologize when I say that I am proud to be an American. Never. Never. And that's what the critical race theorists want us to do. They want us to apologize for this great country we live in. They want us to disavow America, call it the most racist country in the world. But how could that possibly be true when the stories of folks like Ben Carson are possible? When the stories of folks like Martin Luther King are possible, the stories of folks like Dr. Swain herself are possible. The stories of me are possible. How could these stories ever exist in the most racist country in the world? How could the stories of even some of their most avowed heroes exist in the most racist country in the world? How did Barack Obama become president in the most racist country in the world? How did Kamala Harris somehow become vice president in the most racist country of the world? That's probably a product of affirmative action. We need to look into that. But I think at the end of the day, right? So, but at the end of the day, like, look at those situations. How are any of these stories possible in the most racist country in the world? It just isn't. This is a country where it doesn't matter where you start. It just matters how hard you work. And it just happens to be that a lot of people don't want to work hard these days. And that's the issue here. You know, you can blame the world for all of your problems, your issues all day long. But at the end of the day, you have to rectify with yourself why you are where you are. And I think that when I look at this country today and the problems that we're facing as a nation, we're looking at just really anti-fact-based narratives that are coming about. You have people trying to tell you that it's normal or believable for things like there to be 100 or so genders. You're looking at people trying to make the argument that it's okay and it's sensible for young people to just get, toddlers to say that they don't believe that they're the right gender. Those things aren't right. And, the woke cancel culture wants to tell you that you can't speak up about those things. That if you speak up about those things, that you deserve to be canceled, you deserve to lose your career and your social media account, your Twitter account, all those things, because you simply had the audacity to tell the truth. No, that's not America. That's not America. America is a nation founded upon the values of freedom of speech, a nation founded upon the ideas of freedom of expression, a nation founded upon the ideals of truth. And I think that it's important that if we're going to solve the problems in this country today when it comes to unity, when it comes to coming together as a nation, black, white, purple, yellow, it doesn't matter. We have to be truthful about the issues that confront us. And we have to be truthful about the evil that seeks to divide us. And so when we look at that issue, we have to also ask the question, why are these people trying to divide us? Why do they want you to continuously see black and white and people as your enemies just because they don't look the way that you do? Because that's the way they seek their monopoly on power. They seek to divide us because that's the only way they can conquer us. They seek to divide us because that's the only way they can control us. And if they make someone your enemy, they don't question you. Because when I think about it, when you think about the black community and why they vote 90% Democrat, it's easy to walk away puzzled, right? Because you look at Detroit, you look at Flint, Michigan, you look at Atlanta, you look at all these places, these black-ran cities, Democrats have run them for decades. But the state of the black community in these cities is absolutely horrendous. But they don't want to talk about that. So they make white people the enemy because they don't want to talk about the things that they've done. They don't want to talk about the rampant crime. They don't want to talk about the poverty. They don't want to talk about the lack of school choice or anything like that because they want to talk about Black Lives Matter and all of these things. The things that they say are just the continuation of the civil rights movement. I wonder which civil rights movement they're following. Because the civil rights movement that I remember, and the civil rights movement that Martin Luther King spoke about was about unity. It was about coming together. He was fighting against the depression that was waged by people who believed that they were better than someone else. But now we have liberals telling people that it's okay to think you're better than someone else as long as you're just not white, right? That's not his dream. That wasn't his goal. And those weren't his ideals. It wasn't a message of hate. It was a message of unity, a message of love. And we need to return to that today. There are people in this world who believe that we need to have an enemy, a boogeyman, and all of these things, and I just don't believe that to be true. But I also believe that we have reached a critical point in our country's time where if we don't stand up and fight for what's right, we may very well lose this country. As someone who's just 19 years old, I have a very important stake in the future of this country. It's something that I think about a lot because it's not I'm not nowhere near the point of having kids, thank God, right? But, if I were, it'd be something I would think about. It would keep me up at night. What kind of country are we going to inherit and pass along to the next generation? I don't want it to be AOC's America. I don't want it to be Nancy Pelosi's America. I don't want it to be Chuck Schumer's America. Because that's not the America that America was supposed to be, founded to be, meant to be. But the only way we can prevent that is if we stand up and fight like we mean it. Not just passively and just going along to get along, as some people would like to believe. The thing is, there are some people on our side just really aren't on our side, right? They say the same things we say, but their actions don't match their words. We have establishment folks who think that, world's pretty bad, but we'll get through it. Nah, we won't. The thing is, we have to stand up and fight because there's way too much on the line. Ronald Reagan once said that we would find ourselves at a time for choosing. And I think that you can't look at the world around us today and not also see yourself in a time just like that. We are at a time of choosing, where we must decide what type of nation we will be. Will we be a nation lost to hate, division, socialism, open borders, no law and order? Or will we be a nation intended to be the pinnacle and the shining city on a hill that we were blessed and divine to be, right? A nation where opportunity is limitless. A nation where you see people not as your enemies because they look different than you, but as a potential friend. A nation where we still can have unity. A nation where we can still build bridges and alliances. A nation where the color of your skin is not a disability, but it's simply an accessory, right? You can't control the color of your skin. You can't control if you're black, white, Hispanic, whatever. But what you can control is how hard you work, how hard you chase your dreams, how hard you go after them, and how hard you believe in the greatness of this great country that we're so blessed to be a part of. And that's something I think about a lot. We are blessed to be Americans, even if they don't want to acknowledge it. Even if the left and all of those folks don't want to acknowledge how grateful we should be to be an American, I am so proud of this country. They want to talk about all the bad that has happened in America. They want to talk about slavery, segregation, all of those things, and those things were terrible. But I think what defines America more so than those egregious acts is the fact that we always strived to be more perfect. We sought to improve. We recognized that slavery was wrong, segregation was wrong, but we never stopped trying to be a more perfect version of ourselves. No one is perfect. I'm not perfect. No one here is perfect. So why should our country be, right? And so this entire idea that we should educate young people into believing that America is this irredeemable racist nation is not only wrong, but it's just not accurate. We all have a story in which we identified a problem. We sought to become better versions of ourselves, and our country is no different. The fact that we overcame slavery, the fact that we overcame segregation, that is the story we should be teaching in history classes. The fact that we are a nation of overcomers, a nation of progress, a nation that never gave up on itself. That is the story of America. That is the American dream. The fact that we have heroes like Ben Carson, the fact that we have heroes like Martin Luther King Jr., that is the story of America. And that is the story that we should tell. But they don't want to teach that story. They want to teach young people about the Ben Carsons of the world, the Condoleezza Rices of the world, the Candace Owens of the world, because those people are not victims. And the only way they win is if they make us all victims. But the American dream wasn't meant for victims. It was meant for victors. It was meant for victors. It was meant for people who saw a goal, identified in themselves something that few people may have even saw. But they chased a dream, they chased a goal because they believed in something bigger than themselves. They believed in themselves, right? And I think that is what we need now more than ever. People not looking for a problem to blame or someone to blame, but instead a problem to solve. We are in a very important juncture in the history and the course of our nation. We see inflation rising. We see a nation that has lost its ground on the international stage. We see a president who is drunk behind the wheel without even taking a sip of alcohol. It's crazy. And we have to fight back. We have to take our country back. And it may not be easy. It may not be hard. It may not be the simplest thing, but it will most certainly be worthwhile. And I ask you guys, some of you are a lot older than me in this room, don't give up on us. Don't give up on us. Because I've got to say, there is hope to be had. You know, I go to the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. Tough week for us, by the way. Lost national championship. I'm a native Georgian, so, you know, it's at my phone, you can only imagine. It's just, people were just not nice. It was crazy. Whatever. But then we lost to Auburn the next, it was terrible. But, you know, oh my God, going through it. But, you know, I go to the University of Alabama, and there are people there who, you know, they're not political. I have tons of apolitical friends, some liberal friends even, and they are just simply looking up and they're realizing, like, this is not the way our country should be. This isn't normal. This shouldn't be the status quo. This shouldn't be something we simply accept. This is not okay. And I've got to say that, you know, the thing about what's happening in this country is that while it is uncomfortable and it's hard, I think it's important for it to happen. I think that the left and these radical forces need to overplay their hand. I think they need to believe that they are more influential and more popular than they are so that they can actually see the wrath of the people. Because what they think right now is that they can do whatever they want, do whatever they wish, and they can push these boundaries that simply don't exist, that are there. They can push things like post-birth abortions. They can push things like this entire idea that there are 100 pronouns or whatever. And there are real sensible people, not even conservatives, not even political people, Republicans, who are just like, this isn't right. And that's what I think we need to do. It's not even about being more conservative or more Republican. We just need more people to look up and say, this isn't right. And I think Martin Luther King's words speak on that, right? He said, our lives begin to not matter anymore when we become silent about the things that matter. Well, I'm looking around, I'm seeing a lot of things that matter. The state of this country matters. The fight to make America first again matters. The fight to ensure that we don't lose this country matters. The fight to return our nation to the values that underpin it, the values that built it, that fight matters. And it's going to be led by every single person in this room. And that is where we're at right now. But also, too, I think we're looking at the incredible people behind this event, you know, Moms for Liberty. Credit to all of you guys who are in this room today. Congratulations to you. We need parents who are going to fight back, too. You know, like I said, I'm very much invested in the future of this country because I have to be. You guys are too. You have kids growing up in this country. And I think it speaks to the passion that is the foundation of your entire organization to see you guys out here fighting as well. You know, my parents are Democrats, so that's interesting. My mom will not be joining Moms for Liberty, but I wish she would. So I got to say, to see moms out here fighting the good fight, fighting to make this America a more perfect union, and fighting to make America really, truly great again. It's not being made great again by people on the way out. It's being made by people that are here. And I think that, you know, people oftentimes ask me, how do I make my kid more conservative? Well, you're the answer to that, right? Like, you grow up and you see your parents modeling these values, these behaviors, and if you see your parents love America, you're probably going to love America too. If you see your parents believe in the idea that America is a country that was based upon the ideals of limited government, personal responsibility, you will probably inherit those values too. You know, the scripture is clear. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it, right? And so that is not any different when it comes down to political values and ideals. ideals, train up a child in the way that he should go, and so that when he is old, he will not depart from it. That is where we are at today. Make the investment in this next generation of Americans, because it's going to be us carrying this fight, fighting the fight to ensure that we do not lose this country, because America is not just a country that you sit on the sidelines and watch burn, but it's a country so great that you get in the fight and you fight for it and you don't stop until you win. Thank you so much, guys. God bless America. Thank you so much.
Now, as one that's involved with Blexit, that's the organization that Candace Owens started, Turning Point USA, Clara Luce Booth, PragerU, Young America's Foundation, I can tell you that there are hundreds of thousands of young people who are conservative, who are questioning what they're being told in schools, the indoctrination, and many of them are Black, Hispanic, and Asian, and they're not just rolling over, you know, that they really do care about our nation and the kind of country they're going to raise their children in. And so you should be encouraged. There's a lot that would discourage us, but there's a lot of reasons for us to be encouraged, and we should be encouraged by the fact that there are young people out there that are really fighting along with their parents for the kind of America that respects our Judeo-Christian values and principles. So give yourselves a round of applause because you raised some of these children. Now, if you looked at your program, we are moving ahead. I mean, we're ahead of schedule, and that's by design. There are a few people that would like to get home tonight, and they don't want to be stuck by the weather. And so what we are going to do is sort of speed up things. And so next on the program will be something that is not listed on the program, but it is a 4-minute movie trailer. And then after the trailer plays, I'm going to have you speak with one of the panelists who's responsible for this film. And so next we will run a film that will be released very soon. You're going to love it. I'm in it.
Public education has gone off the rails.
Once you get into this idea that it's really the government's job to educate children, you end up in a very, very dangerous place, and I don't see anything good coming out of that.
When we look at this radical agenda, the way our children are being exploited and the way parents are getting shut out, it comes down to one fundamental question. Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
¿De quién son esos niños?
Whose children are they?
Where did this idea come from that we're even asking whose children are they?
It's where all the money is. It's why the union is there. It's why it's so corrupt.
In my opinion, the union has gone from caring about children to a very different agenda. Now it's about power and money and politics, and somehow the kids are getting lost in all of that.
America as we know it is being reimagined in a very dangerous way.
That just lights a fire into my butt, and that's why I want to put a stop to critical race theory so that a lot of friendships can be saved and that we can just all get along.
You know, I hesitate to say that there was a silver lining to COVID, but it's that parents suddenly had this window into what their children were learning day in and day out.
Critical race theory is dividing our children in ways that are unacceptable.
You cannot use racism to eradicate racism.
Less than 1/3 of America's school children are proficient in anything.
They're teaching these kids X-rated sex acts.
I don't want my daughter exposed to that.
The school system wants to indoctrinate us teachers first before we indoctrinate your kids.
Certain ways of thinking are approved, and certain ways of thinking are not.
They sentenced me to jail because I wanted a better education for my daughters.
They're not interested in tolerance.
Their whole goal is to intimidate, to silence the opposition.
There's so much damage done by the lockdown on the students.
Days turned into weeks and then months.
It doesn't actually surprise me that there's been more suicides. I know I've had those thoughts.
They told me, if you want to teach, you'll sign.
We want to make sure that teachers know that you do have another option.
Right now in schools, it is not safe to be a teacher.
This was the most preventable mass murder in American history.
Less than 30 seconds, it was done.
And my daughter was murdered at the school.
If we lose this battle on the educational front, then we lose not only our country, but we lose our kids. And we lose the ability to bring our children up the way that we want.
They are assaulting parental rights. They are not respecting our cultures, our values. They're not respecting our voice.
The reality is we're not dissenters, we're the parents.
So the question has to be asked.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Rebecca Friedrichs, a longtime veteran teacher from California, and one of the producers on this movie. And we just wanted you to know that we brought this today because you are a trusted group and a very special group. You are the very first group to ever see this sneak peek, and we haven't even announced it to the public yet. So we are hoping that you'll help us to galvanize parents and teachers and bring them together so that we can fight for our children. We will be announcing this movie to the public this Monday on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And the movie will launch on March 14th via Fathom events. So in Fathom theaters, and you can go to whosechildrenarethey.com to find out about that. Thanks so much for letting us show you our sizzle reel this morning.
Okay, we can do all things. We're flexible. I'd like to introduce my friend and the moderator of this panel, and Mary Poplin. And Mary is someone like me that left academia. Well, she didn't leave academia. She had a midlife Christian conversion. And so we share that in common. And we're both university professors, and Mary is still a university professor. She's going to moderate the panel and also contribute to the panel. And sorry about the confusion. So Mary, you turn your attention here, please.
Okay.
Focus, 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 focus.
That's what happens to university professors.
So this is the morning panel that was supposed to start at 10, but because of airline flights, we're starting this panel early. And Mary Poplin, my book, Be the People, A Call to Reclaim America's Faith and Promise, well, that was written at her apartment in California, was drafted there, where I had gone for what was meant to be at the time, and a weekend visit, and I ended up staying like 6 weeks. I didn't have my mother at the time, and I finished that manuscript after not having been able to write in Nashville. And so when you read Be the People, A Call to Reclaim America's Faith and Promise, you have to thank Mary for that, because she was like my slave driver. She she had strict rules, and some of the rules were that we would write in the morning, and I never thought I could write in the same room with someone else. So Mary had one computer on one side of the wall and another computer on another side, and we would write until 9 to 12, and then we would spend the afternoons playing, going to museums, hiking. And so that book got done because she would say, "Get off social media." No, you have to finish the book. The book is too important not to finish. And so she is responsible for that book. And so I introduce you to Mary Poplin, my slave driver.
I think I was nicer than that. Anyway, the book got done, and it's a beautiful book, as are all of her books. And Carol is just an amazing person. I'm probably her best fan, and I am a university professor until the end of February. I have been there for 40 years, and it's time for me to write a book, right? So write a little more. But I'm very excited about today's panel. And even the question, reform or exit the public schools. I think that we have actually representatives on our panel of both sides, somebody who's trying to work inside the public schools, and then people from outside. And we're going to start with Pastor Stephen Brogan, who is a pastor who has degrees from the University of Michigan, Dallas Theological Seminary. He is the founder of an amazing church in Dallas called Fair Park Bible Church, and he's been there for 18 years. His church works with family assistance, economic opportunities. He's the co-host of a radio show, and he's very active in what, I don't know if everybody knows about this, the Black pro-life movement, the movement in the Black community to stop abortion inside that community. Amen. He also works with other pastors regarding teaching them about the culture wars. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Pastor Stephen Brogan.
Well, good morning, and I'm glad to be here with you on this important occasion. I believe we're in the midst of a very urgent hour. Our nation is under threat. And in order for us to rescue this republic, it's going to require of us to be engaged and engage with an intent to turn things around. They must be turned around. And first of all, let me do a slight correction. My mother would want me to do this. It's Stephen, not Stephen. The PH in my name makes an F sound. Stephen, not a V. But that's something Mama taught me a long time ago. But to get back to the point, and my time is limited, so I'm going to try to rush through a lot of this. But I'm going to set it up by giving you a motivation for why we are here today. Most of us who are here on the panel, and certainly Dr. Swain, are operating with a sense of urgency. And part of our effort, mine in particular as a pastor, is to provide information, education in order to activate. There is no activation unless there's information and education. Information asks and answers the question, what's going on? And unfortunately in America, too many of us who are citizens of this great land are oblivious as to the intensity and the threat that is coming at us from every aspect of our culture. So the first step, I think, for all of you and many of us here who are engaged is to inform. And part of what we're doing here is to inform. Education is this next question. It asks and answers the question, why is this happening to us? How could it be in the land of the free and the home of the brave that we're fighting off tyranny? There's a reason for that. And I'm going to try to give you some of that in a few moments. why it is we have been under an assault from the turning of the 19th century to the 20th century. This didn't happen under Barack Obama, by the way. This has been coming at us for a very long time. Some of us know about the Fabian Socialist, the Fabian Society, and how they engaged the aristocrats and the intelligentsia and flipped them into socialists. And they've been coming at us for a long time. We're at the apex or at the culmination of a long march towards socialism in America. Out of information education comes activation. No activation if you're not informed. No activation if you're not engaged or educated. Most women in here know what empty activation is all about. You take a pot of water, you sit it on the stove, you turn the fire on. What happens? The water boils. If you don't do nothing with it, what happens? It evaporates. And that's what's happening right now. A lot of us are engaged, but we don't have context. And because we don't have context, we don't know what we're doing or where we're going. And so there's a screaming need, a desperate need for us to be informed and educated. Matthew Spaulding wrote a book that is titled, "We Still Hold These Truths." We still hold these truths. In it, he sets forth what I believe is the roadmap for rescue of our republic. We need to start in understanding that America is has a religious-based heritage of liberty under law, and that the Constitution was written to limit the government, not the people, right? And so that's the first thing. We need to know that our Constitution is the means by which we can harness or rather capture this wild beast of socialism that is loose in our culture. We can harness him, pull him down, and put him back in the cage, the Constitution. But there are two things under assault right now in America, and most of you know that. The Constitution, who's dying a death of 1,000 cuts, and the religious institutions of America. They're in the crosshairs of the liberal left and the socialist, because those two institutions or two realities are the things that they must overcome in order to force us into hard tyranny. It was Mark Levin who says that we're in soft tyranny right now. And he, in his book titled Tyranny and Liberty, says this. He says, the remedy to tyranny is conservatism, precisely because its principles are the founding principles. Did you hear that? Its principles, conservatism, are the founding principles. It is those principles that birthed this nation into existence. It is those principles that compelled us into history as being one of the greatest nations on the planet Earth. What are those principles? And here is the problem. Most of us don't know what they are. There are 10 of them, and I'm going to share with you in a few moments what those 10 are. But we need to re-engage those principles. We need to know what they are. We need to know that there's a difference between liberty and freedom. Liberty is responsible action of freedom. Freedom is dangerous if it's not harnessed. If I have freedom to come up and take your wife, you say, no, you don't. But I say, wait a minute, I got freedom. Right? So we don't want freedom that's not controlled freedom. That's liberty. That's what we want. Amen? Amen. Now, Chuck Swindoll, who's one of the preachers that finished from my seminary, says when you say amen to a preacher, it's like saying sick 'em. Amen. I started with Matthew Spaulding. Matthew Spaulding says this. In his book, We Still Hold These Truths, says in his introduction, our revolution, the American Revolution, was about the idea upon which a new nation was to be established. Permanent truth, underscore the word permanent. permanent truths applicable to all men at all times. As Abraham Lincoln later proclaimed, that the principles rather than will be the ultimate grounds of government, good government. Permanent truths. The liberals would have us know that they are ever-changing truths, that we're evolving. But that's not true for those of us who are Christians, for we know that there are immutable truths, unchanging truths that stay even now until forevermore. And so we got some truths that we need to camp on and to rescue this republic. Now, those principles, we call them the founding principles. There are 10 core principles. Number 1, get your pencils and papers out. Number 1, liberty. Number 2, equality. 3, natural rights. 4, consent of the governed. Underscore that one. Consent of the governed. That means we give consent. Come on, somebody. Number 5, religious freedom. Number 6, private property. And number 7, the rule of law, which is being undermined today, redefined into chaos deliberately. For chaos is an instrument or in the toolbox of the liberal left. Number 8, constitutionalism. And number 9, self-government. And number 10, independence. It is those principles, brothers and sisters, men and women, that will rescue this republic. And we need to reorient ourselves with it, re-engage it, and appropriate it in the public square again. Educate our children of those 10 founding principles. America is great because of those principles. And we need to exercise them, use them today to push back against this tyranny that's coming at us, unfettered and unchecked, unfortunately. The 3 branches of government right now are not working with us. Come on, somebody. And if I read the preamble to the Constitution right, it says this: we, the people, do ordain. We ordain. We didn't ordain that stuff. We ordain what is in the Constitution. So we need to get that Constitution out and look at it again. I want to share a couple of thoughts, and I'm going to sit down and allow you to cogitate a little bit. But I want to give you a couple of quotes that I think will help you to see the urgency of the hour, and that the necessity for us to respond is now, not tomorrow. You can't look at this problem and say amen and then go sit down. And may I say to you, I love America and the dream that compels us, but I'm not sleep. For nothing comes to a sleeper but a dream, and when he wakes up, that's gone. Come on, somebody. Stop telling me about the American dream and start living it out or fleshing it out daily, right? American dream has too many people asleep right now, and most of us are in pursuit of that dream, and it has turned from liberty to materialism, and we're in pursuit of materialism, which will drive us into the ground and make us vulnerable and susceptible to manipulation. Too many of us are selling America out right now. A lot of our technology is going to Germany because Americans are, or to Russia because, or to China, all of them, because of our people are selling it to them. They have no morals. No morals. Our morals have gone. Now listen to this. This is a quote from John Dewey. I hope I'm not taking this from Alec. John Dewey says he was a socialist and he was a signer of the Human Manifesto, education as a process of socializing children rather than educating them to achieve their individual potential. He says it's socialization. Your schools have changed your children to be a little socialist. They hate capitalism. Ask your teenagers, what's wrong with socialism? The Humanist magazine in 1983 said this. It featured an article that posted, "The battle for mankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new. The rotten corpse of Christianity and the new faith in humanism." They hate Christianity. It stands in their way. And if you don't recognize that, brother Christian and sister Christian, you are a part of the problem. Here's what Woodrow Wilson said. And this is what he said in 1887. Listen carefully. Quote, "What one generation would resist, but eventually accept, the next generation will accept it because their parents did. And the next generation will just operate under the assumption that it has always been this way." We are at that point. We are at that point. And I'll say this and I'll sit down. Every major institution in America is under the control of the liberal left. Every major institution in America that influence us, education, major media, the arts, the government.
Still you?
Huh? Oh, yeah. And the government, and then there's others that are influencing us. I'm telling you, we got a fight on our hands and we need to move.
Wow, pretty amazing, really. Okay, so we're going from the pastor to the scientist. Wenman Yoon has her PhD recently, actually, right, in international studies, and she is doing research that examines the implementation and the promotion of CRT and DEI and ethnic studies and all of these, and she's studied it across 40 districts, and she's here to tell us what are the major winning strategies that she's seen. Wenyan, thank you so much.
Good morning. Wow, Pastor, you just set the bar very high for me, and I'm gonna talk about some boring technical stuff on how to take back our public education system, because I am an optimist, or I'm naive, call me naive. I do believe that there is some saving. With that, I have some good news. Has anyone here heard about the story or the news articles about California teaching kids to chant to ask their gods and deities? How many of you? Raise your hand. My good news is that yesterday, the state of California, the California Department of Education and the California Board of Education have signed a settlement agreement in our lawsuit launched by my organization against them, challenging the constitutionality of these chants. So the state has agreed to remove the chants from their curriculum. And the state will also issue a public notice to all over 1,000 school districts across the state of California that they should not be encouraged to teach kids to chant to pagan gods. So with that being said, I'm going to go straight to my talking points. I come from a academic background of studying energy governance. So I want to make a comparison between the choice between exit and reform to the choice between renewables and fossil fuels. And that's why I say that at the beginning I am in the middle, I'm an optimist. I think that we still need to save our public education system, and I will go into how, just based on, as Mary said, my research initiative looking into district level, school district level implementation of CRT and other CRT-rooted programs and initiatives such as DEI, critical ethnic studies, etc. And I will touch upon 3 pressure points and 2 strategies to restore and rescue our public education system from a critical race to the bottom. So to start off, the 3 pressure points are legal or administrative challenges, political campaigns, and local organizing. The 2 proven strategies are alliance building and smart evidence-based advocacy. All the experience that I'm going to share today is rooted in my own field experience as well as observations from my empirical research. So the number 1 pressure point applies especially to school districts or localities that have been completely taken over by ideologues and radicals. So in these areas, we need to identify the most egregious cases in which schools, districts, and county boards of education, or even at the state level, they violate constitutional principles of free speech and equal rights and sue them, or bring administrative challenges against these entities. So we're seeing growing number of law cases throughout the country challenging the teaching of race-based concepts, and we see that in the Clark versus Democracy PrEP case in Nevada. We did it in California and succeeded, and we also have an administrative case here in Franklin, Tennessee, right? You guys brought the first administrative civil rights challenge or complaint against the State Department of Education on a particular DEI curriculum. So we need to do that, and we need to keep doing that. The second pressure point is applicable to areas that have seen some level of hijacking or indoctrination, but are not completely subverted by the fringe far-left agenda of critical race theory or critical social justice. I believe that in these areas we can mount successful and effective campaigns, political campaigns, to identify, inform, and train local and state-level candidates to run for these key school board positions or state legislature positions, to help make our voices heard in these areas. All politics is local, and we need to start from bottom up. And we have already seen a lot of success stories coming out from last November's election in blue counties in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, Kansas. We're seeing anti-CRT candidates taking over, winning back these seats, and getting themselves back into the decision-making power to empower parents. Parents and community members, because we still are the primary stakeholders in our children's education. And we can win if we organize smartly, if we base our campaigns, base our organizing in sound research, in good strategies, which I will talk about in a little bit. The last pressure point applies to school districts or counties or local areas with huge potential for a parental revolt to take over, to take back control, such as Franklin, Tennessee. So what can we do in these areas? Local residents, taxpayers, moms, dads, granddads, grandmoms need to coordinate. And We need to monitor existing policies, programs, curricula in your schools, in your school districts, and to see if there are incidents or examples of indoctrination, examples of race-based treatment. And we need to participate in the local democratic process by showing up to school board meetings, giving public comments. When opportunities arise, we need to proactively engage with the decision makers, whether be it a school board member or a school district official. We need to sit them down and let them know. So all these 3 pressure points have 2 common threads. Number 1, we need to raise, the key of our movement is really to raise public awareness of parents, citizens, elected officials, and candidates, because this is real, and we've already established the baseline fact that we're facing an invasion of a very illiberal, un-American, and divisive ideology. And they need to know. People who are not in the field, who are not studying this, they need to know. And number 2, we need to help these otherwise very decentralized actors to overcome various collective action problems by giving them information, by organizing them smartly. So so I'm going to conclude with my 2 self-evident and proven strategies of success. Number 1, broad-based multiracial coalition building across racial, ethnic, and political lines. And we've done it in California. So in 2020, professionally, I come from a background of campaigning against race-based affirmative action. And in 2020, we won a statewide ballot measure campaign against the establishment. We won 9.65 million votes, and which equated probably 57.2% of the votes to defeat ballot measure initiative that would have brought back racial preferences and racial discrimination in public education. And we did it by appealing to our Democratic friends, our independent friends, our friends from different racial and ethnic groups, because at the end of the day, we want very similar, simple things in life. And we're not so different. And if we're genuine, we're honest, our message will get across to the other side. Number 2, and I will wrap up my remarks, we need to root our advocacy work in smart research, informed by actual data on an ongoing day-to-day basis. And we see this in the research initiative that I am still expanding on. We take the data and we talk to our local supporters and volunteers. We let them know, hey, your district is worth saving, even though that you probably have some bad experiences dealing with the ideologues, the teachers' unions. It's not that bad. It's not completely taken over. And even if your district is rated 0 in my database, which means that it has been completely hijacked by the other side, help us identify these violations in your children's classroom. Tell us your stories, share with us, and we can help you fight. So with that being said, there is hope, and I look forward to working together with this impressive group. I look forward to working together with this impressive group.
What amazing timing you have. Okay, so we've gone from the pastor to the scientist, and now we're going to the journalist, activist. Okay, so we've gone from the pastor to the scientist, and now we're going to the journalist, activist. So Alex Newman is an award-winning journalist. He's and the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media. He writes for diverse publications, and he's co-authored a book called Crimes of the Educators: How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. So thank you, Alex.
Thank you, guys. I consider it a tremendous honor and a privilege to be able to speak with you. I want you guys to imagine for a moment, if you would, a school building on fire. And you feel the heat, it's getting hotter, it's getting uncomfortable. Suddenly you start to hear horrifying screams, and then you smell burning human flesh. And then you realize your child is inside. Now we got to figure out, what do? We got a few options. Option A, we can run for school board. Option B, we could circulate a petition. Option C, we could file a lawsuit. Or option 4, we can do what any sensible parent would do, and you could run in the building, grab your child, regardless of the risk, regardless of the cost, regardless of the sacrifice, and protect them. So I want to say, in reality, it's really not even an adequate analogy, because a fire is only going to hurt your child physically. And what's going on in the public schools today is much worse than physical damage. In fact, the Bible tells us there are things much worse than death, and there are. What's going on in the public schools right now is our children are being destroyed mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, academically, and so on. And it's not just our children. I mean, it's our nation that's being destroyed, it's our churches, it's our families, it's our communities, and the root is all in the government's indoctrination system masquerading as a school system. So I want to thank Dr. Swain for having this panel. I think it's time that we move the debate beyond whether we're going to reform a public school and start discussing whether we can reform it or whether we need to get out. I think that's where we need to be discussing. And I completely respect my friends who want to reform the school. I know a lot of people. I'm helping people who are running for school board and things like this. But I say, first get your child out of danger, then run for school board. I want to just briefly touch on each of those points, on our children being destroyed. Mentally, I mean, you don't have to believe me. This is not my data. Go to the federal government. Every 2 years, they do the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Look at their data. Less than 1/3 of the victims of government schools are proficient in anything. In math, in English, in science, in history. They know nothing. And if you think their proficiency standards measure up to what you think is a good education, you're kidding yourself. Our kids are dumb as a box of rocks, and we've gone through 3 generations of this. We don't even realize how dumbed down we have become as a people. That's how we got into this mess. It's even worse in the black community than it is on average in America, and that's by design. I'm not a believer in systemic racism. I don't believe America's a systemically racist place, but if you look at the history of the public school system, you'll find actual systemic racism. Okay, there were several key founders and architects of this monstrosity we call the public school system today. One of them, of course, was John Dewey. His partner in crime, the guy who actually brought him into Teachers College at Columbia University, was a man by the name of Edward Thorndike. His name has been scrubbed from the history books for obvious reasons. He was a radical progressive. He was also a eugenicist. He believed in this racial pseudoscience, this quackery that some races are better than other races and we should prevent some races from reproducing. This is madness. He's the one who said black people don't need a real education. We could just train them for manual labor. So there was systemic racism in the history of our public school system, and nobody wants to acknowledge it. Instead, they want to say that our country is systemically racist today. There are some schools in this country that cannot produce one single student that's proficient in anything. Can you imagine any other business, in any other industry, where less than 1/3 of customers actually got what they were paying for? They'd be shut down so fast your head would spin. And yet the government schools say, give us more money. Just give us more money. Give us your kids. We'll fix it. How many times have we heard that? We've heard that for generations now. Our kids know all about gender theory. They know all about climate change. They know all about CRT and how some races are mean and some are victims, some are oppressors. It's absolute garbage. But they don't know anything about anything that matters. They don't know our history. They don't know how to do math. They can't even read a book, for crying out loud, okay? So we do have systemic racism in the government school system. We have indoctrination like you can't imagine, okay? I'm on the advisory board of the Nehemiah Institute. They study worldview. What they have found through their research over 30 years is that more than 80% of Christian children who go to a government brainwash camp for 12 years are going to leave the church. Christian parents, do you like those odds? It's like playing Russian roulette, but you got 5 rounds in the chambers instead of 1. And your kid is the one facing that barrel. I wouldn't put my kid through that, okay? 70% of my generation describe themselves as socialists. I'm always embarrassed to admit I'm a millennial because people automatically assume you're a moron, and it's not unjustified, right? 70% in scientific polls say that they are socialists. Folks, we're going to lose our country. We're going to end up like Venezuela faster than you can imagine if this continues. But it doesn't have to continue. Now, John Dewey, I mentioned the architect of this system. He was a monster. He went to the Soviet Union and studied the system there, and boy, did he like it. You could read his articles. He thought it was fantastic. Why would we allow a guy who loves the Soviet communist system that slaughtered tens of millions of people to educate our children, to create the system that educates our children? He was, by the way, the life honorary president of the teachers union that Rebecca will talk about in a moment. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. How many of you have heard of Marva Collins? Oh, my goodness. See, this is what they do. They hide our heroes from us. Marva Collins was an amazing black educator. She used to work in the government schools of Chicago. She said, this is an atrocity. I'm not going to do it anymore. She set up an alternative school for troubled black youngsters, and she trained doctors, lawyers, engineers, higher test scores than any of their white peers. They proved that Charles Murray's so-called bell curve was a fraud. All black children needed was a real, legitimate education. And you know what she said? I will never take a penny in government money. Why? Because the government destroys everything it touches. There's a movie about Marva Collins. I can't encourage you to watch it highly enough. A lot of this history is told in the book Crimes of the Educators. I'm told there'll be some copies over there later if you want it. Now, John Dewey, I mentioned him. He wrote the essay, The Primary Education Fetish. And in this essay, he actually outlined a plan to dumb down our country. It sounds extraordinary, but it's true. I've reprinted the essay in the back of the appendix because it's so important. He argued, we don't need to spend all this time and money teaching kids how to read and write and do math. No, we need to socialize them. We need to turn them into good little collectivists, and that's exactly what they have done, folks. So John Dewey resurrected this quackery that had been debunked 50 years earlier, the whole word method of teaching reading. He tried it out in an experimental school he set up in Chicago funded by the Rockefellers and found out, hey, we just graduated a bunch of kids who can't read, they can't write, and they can't tell right from wrong. That'll be perfect. Let's do that on a national level, and that's exactly what they did. You wonder why, according to the federal government's data, 50% of our country is either illiterate or so close to it we can lump them all together? That's why. It was deliberate. It was a plan. Nobody wants to admit it, but it's true. Now, I'm not accusing the first grade teacher. They don't know any better. That's how they were trained when they went to their teacher's college at the College of Education. They don't know any better. They think they're helping the kids, but they are dumbing them down. They're turning them into illiterates, and it's an atrocity. Dr. Carson, who's one of my heroes, actually, the first time I ever came across him was in a documentary he made about this very problem. Our kids need to learn how to read properly. There's only one way to do it. It's with phonics, not with the quackery that's being used under the Common Core. Now, they're destroying our children spiritually, I mean this in an absolute literal sense. The history of government schools is dominated by anti-Christian fanatics. Okay? Christians had almost nothing to do with the establishment of government schools. If you go through the history, Robert Owen was the first man to seriously propose that the government should educate our children. People don't know, for 2,000 years, parents of church history, parents and the church educated children, not the government. Read your Bible. Any which way, you'll never find one iota of delegation of power over education to Caesar. That's the job of parents, and that's very clear through Scripture. So Robert Owen, a communist before communism was cool, said, hey, we should have government educate kids. People said, well, that's a dumb idea. Wait, why should the government educate our kids? We're quite capable of educating our kids. Well, long story short, Horace Mann comes along. This Owenite system had been tried in Prussia. Horace Mann imported it to the United States. Horace Mann also rejected the Bible. He wanted to get it out of the classroom, which at that time was practically heresy. That didn't work right away. He wanted to equalize all men using the public school system. And by equalize, yes, he meant socialize. And then along came John Dewey. Now, John Dewey was a very religious man. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And he wanted to use the public school system to spread his false religion straight from the pit of hell. He actually signed his name. He was one of the co-authors of the Humanist Manifesto, as Pastor Brogan mentioned. Read it. The very first plank. We religious humanists believe the universe is self-existing and not created. That's a religious statement. It takes a lot of faith to believe something so nonsensical. What does the Bible say? Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. Pretty simple. Okay, what did our founding fathers say? It's a self-evident truth that God created us. So if you believe in John Dewey's religion, you cannot have a free society based on the principle that God created us and gave us rights and created us equally. It's just that simple. These are the implications of this, folks. Today, we have, as our previous speaker just explained, schools in California. Just yesterday, they finally stopped. But what kind of mind would think that elementary school children need to chant to pagan, demonic, Aztec deities of cannibalism and war and human sacrifice? These are the people who run your public schools today, folks. They are leading your children to destruction. Now, when Martin Luther King was alive, when he was promoting his cause, you still had Bibles in public schools. You still had prayer in public school. In 1962 and 1963, the Supreme Court took it out. And one of the dissenting justices in these cases, Justice Potter Stewart, hit the nail on the head. He said, what's happening here is not creation of neutrality with respect to religion. What's happening here is the establishment of the religion of secularism, or as John Dewey would have called it, humanism. Now, Jesus tells us very clearly in the Scriptures, it's recorded twice, once in the Gospel of Luke, once in the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 12:30. He who is not with me is against me. There's two options, folks, and only two. There's the kingdom of Satan, the kingdom of man, or the kingdom of God. Those are your options. Now, who in here wants to make the argument that the public schools are with Christ? And the answer is always nobody, because that's ridiculous, and we all recognize that. The pagans, the Satanists, the atheists, they don't send their children to Christian schools, but the Christians send their children to the pagan humanist schools. Why? Why do we do this, folks? So, should we reform the public schools? Let me ask you, should we reform cancer? When you get cancer, you think, I want to reform this cancer? No, folks, this cancer is destroying our nation. But there's very good news. The system is crumbling. In the last couple years, millions of families have fled this abomination for the promised land, if you will, of homeschooling, Christian schools. This exodus is growing very rapidly. And it's especially pronounced in the black community. This is Census Bureau data. Before the so-called pandemic, 3% of black families were homeschooling their children. The latest census data shows 16%. And so when people tell me it can't be done, I say, get out of the way. It's being done now. So God tells parents to disciple their children. God tells parents to educate their children. Read Deuteronomy. You're supposed to be educating your kids when you wake up in the morning, when you're eating, when you're walking by the way, and when you're going to bed at night. There's no time for Caesar to get his grimy mitts on your kids, okay? It's that simple. Caesar has no authority. We should have never let the government take over the education and the discipling of our children, and that's all I have. Thank you, folks. God bless you.
Wow, what a day, huh? I'm going to recommend that you all see a movie. I'm sure you can get it somehow. It's called Waiting for Superman. And the reason I'm going to recommend it is it's about poor kids trying to get out of public schools. And it's got some heartbreaking news, that there's not enough private schools, not enough other schools, but it's a very good film, and it has Marva Collins in it. So several people have talked about Marva. So our next guest is, we've had the pastor, the scientist, the journalist, and the activist, journalist-activist, and another activist, right? Rebecca Friedrichs has been fighting inside and outside teacher unions. She's done many editorials, been on all the major news networks, and she's known as a person who fights for the rights of the public sector. And she was in, I think, Politico. Was that something you were? I think I found it on you. They talk about you. Anyway, and the book that you wrote a book, Standing Up to Goliath, which is a great title for the whole panel, actually. So we're welcome Rebecca Friedrichs.
Well, good morning again. What she didn't mention is that I was a long-time California public school teacher. And so I've seen all this evil on the inside. And it is evil. And so I'm so glad that Alex set me up for this talk, because all that Alex shared, he's right, it happened for a reason, it happened on purpose, but it wasn't happening early in our country. Our founders set up the most incredible educational system, classical liberal arts, with phonics and accurate science and accurate history and beautiful cursive. And the children were reading, I think it was something like over 90% of Americans could not only read well, but write well. You know, you'd be a farmer and you'd be writing these beautiful missives. Everyone was well educated. So what I fight for is, let's get back to that, okay? So we didn't call those public schools, but it was our American school system. The government was not involved at all. Basically, all the government did was, if a township was set up, they made sure that there was a plot of land for the school. Moms and dads, great teachers, were in charge of teaching the children well. They used things like Noah's speller, which, by the way, used scripture to teach children. And they used these little, I can't remember the name of all of them now, but we had McGuffey Reader. We had, the Bible. That was our main textbook. We had the 10 Commandments on the wall of every classroom. This is American education, and this is what we need to get back to. So I'm going to tell you a little story. My husband's Aunt Jelaine, we just lost her last year at 103. Well, on her 101st birthday, we went to visit her, and she was a one-room schoolhouse teacher for 40-some years. And so we were just talking about the kids, and I asked her, Aunt Jelaine, what did you do about all the discipline problems? She looked at me like I was from Mars. Discipline problems? I never had a discipline problem. The parents supported me 100%. And she supported them 100%. The difference was the government wasn't in between Aunt Jelaine and the parents and the kids. I also asked her, Aunt Jelaine, what did you do about all those kids who were struggling, who couldn't, read well? She goes, I didn't have any of those. And if a kid was struggling, an older child would help. I didn't have a teacher's aide. One-room schoolhouse, farming community, Minnesota. These weren't rich people. It's not true that the poor can't learn. What's true is you can't learn if you're in a government school. That's what's true. So how did we go from that simple school setting? America's schools were small. They weren't these massive industrial complexes. And I'm really sorry to report to you men, a lot of this industrialness, huge schools, was because of sports. I know sports are important, but let's get them out of our schools. Let's get our schools small again and great again, and we can work out the sports another way. We can have community, whatever. We can have crosstown rivals. We can do all that. But they used that to manipulate us. Oh, grow your school so you can have a big football team. It's not good for the kids' education. These little schools, home schools, I don't want to call them community schools because that's what teachers' unions call them, little neighborhood schools. That's what we did, one-room schoolhouses. So what happened? What made us go from excellent to a nightmare? Enter the so-called teacher unions. So it was in the 1800s that there was a teacher association created. And that teacher association was created by about 100 teachers, and they used to make these little tiny booklets called selections for memorizing. Within those little selections were Bible verses. There were stories of heroism, little poems about being kind and working hard and obeying your parents. They were great, and they made them so that they were really cheap, 1 penny a piece. So teachers could buy them every year to memorize with their students in the schools. Scripture? Yes. Separation of church and state? Not in the Constitution. I think Dr. Carson mentioned that last night. They've used that to manipulate and lie. Okay, so they made these little booklets, and so they started out as something good, but they were infiltrated by unions. So unions, well, why did they use the name union? Well, because people trusted unions. The union was the good side, right? They trusted that, just like people trusted teachers. So that's why they call them teacher unions. They're neither one. They're not teachers. They're not unions. They're a nefarious group with an evil communist agenda. I'm not going to just say socialism. I'm not going to just say Marxism. They're communists. How do I know that? If you read the communist goals, they're doing every single one, okay? My dad taught me, looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Okay, these people are communists. Why'd they pick on teachers? Because our founders told us this: the only way to keep a free republic is with a well-educated, moral citizenry that can self-govern. So they came in to destroy the morals of our children, to destroy their education, purposely destroy their education. They don't want them to read. They don't want them to write. You know why they don't want them to write in cursive? Because our founding documents are in cursive. Primary documents are in cursive. If you can't read your history, you don't know the truth, right? So this is all on purpose. So the unions claim to represent teachers. I'm here, longtime teacher. I even served as a union rep for a while to try to change things from the inside. It's evil on the inside. I can tell you they do not represent teachers, period. The teachers' unions are the reason. They're the money, the muscle, the lobbying, everything behind CRT, behind the radical sex ed. They helped start Black Lives Matter and bragged about it on a cover of their magazine. They're behind social emotional learning, dumbing down the education. They even rewrote the scientific method. They crossed out empirical evidence and the repeated steps of the scientific process, in other words, the most important part, and they changed it to consensus and theory. And then they only accept the consensus of radical leftists, other communists. The teacher unions are the problem in our schools. That's why I call them Goliath. So, for a long time, we were all forced to fund them, over 40 years. Forced to fund unions who still collect billions, with a B, annually, tax-free, and they spend it all to destroy your republic, to destroy your beliefs, to destroy your children, to destroy your virtue, to destroy your schools. Billions. Okay, the teachers' unions alone collect billions. Now let's add on all the other government unions. Did you know the CDC is run by a corrupt union? Explains a lot, doesn't it? All of our agencies, like the pastor said, all of our agencies have been infiltrated by these quote unions, these communists. They've infiltrated our institutions. This is why we're in trouble. So I always tell people, what do we need to do? We need to get rid of these unions, okay? So, you know, the question about how do we keep the American dream? Number one, get unions out. How do we do that? Well, it's really actually pretty simple. We need the will, we need courage, but government unions were illegal. They were not allowed because you can't have someone putting someone in office and then bargaining on the other side of the table with them, all with taxpayer money. We knew that even the leader of one of those unions from the old days, some guy named Meany, I think, even he said we shouldn't have government unions. Okay, it's corrupt. So first, policy-wise, we need to make unions illegal again. Get them out. We also need to end collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is what took parents out of the conversation. So get unions out, including their allies like the ACLU and Planned Parenthood and Southern Poverty Law Center, out. All these special interest groups out. I was telling Alex earlier, if you don't get the unions out, you're going to just do school choice or you're going to just run for school board. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a heart attack. Okay, it's not going to work. The schools are corrupted by the unions. As long as they're there, that fire that he was talking about, it's going to keep blazing. I always tell people, it's funny, I always use kind of the same one. I always say, hey, look, the schoolhouse is on fire, the kids and teachers are inside. So we got to get them out, and we need to get these unions out. They're the ones who started the fire. We also, second thing we need to do, go back to our beginnings. Let's go back to the way Aunt Jelaine taught. Let's go back to classical liberal arts, 10 Commandments on the wall, Bible in the classroom, virtue, patriotism, critical thinking, including the Socratic method. Let's go back to debate. Let's go back to true science. Let's go back to true history. And yes, number one, phonics, phonics, phonics. Yes. 3. Thank you. 3, we must disband the national, state, and county departments of education. Goodbye. 4, as I mentioned earlier, end collective bargaining. You know, I think collective bargaining was granted to unions via executive order. I think that's true. Be easy to get rid of, wouldn't it? 5, we need to put parents and great teachers like Aunt Jelaine back in charge. So, how else can we get unions out? This is your homework. I'm a teacher, I give homework. So, here's your homework. You saw our movie trailer. We need you to adopt teachers, every teacher you know. And every single one of you has homework. You all have to do it. Adopt teachers. Tell them the truth. Show them our movie. I wrote a book, Standing Up to Goliath. It tells them all about the evil that their unions are doing. Did you know that the majority of teachers are conservatives? Did you know that the majority, and I'm talking in California too, the majority of teachers are people of faith? Did you know the majority of teachers don't agree with this evil agenda, but they've been so deceived that their union is not the evil, they keep paying them? About 85% of teachers are still paying these evil unions. And they don't have to. We took a case to the Supreme Court. They've been freed. They don't have to pay them anymore. We need your help to educate them. Adopt a teacher. That's your homework. What we need these teachers to do is a mass union exit. They need to get out. If they get out, we can defund these people. They also need to stand together so that we can eventually decertify them. Hopefully we can make them illegal, but if not, teachers can decertify them. They just have to stand together with a simple majority and decertify them. So how can we get to these solutions? Obedience to God, faith in God, a ton of prayer, fasting, courage. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Have I not suggested to you? Have I not, you should not. Commanded, not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. We need hard work, and we need to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations with indoctrinated teachers. So thank you for adopting teachers with me, and God bless you. We're going to win this war.
So we have a few minutes for questions. Does anybody have a burning question that you want to ask one or throw out to the panelist? Or does a panelist have a burning question? Number 4 on your speech.
Number 4.
Okay.
It was end collective bargaining.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
Yes. I should ask the first question. The first question is, what are we going to do with the decent public school teachers who are trying to raise their families and can't leave the job? That's the thing that bothers me the most. There are some very decent, God-loving teachers out there who are caught in the system that provides their insurance through their union and things like that. What are we...
I'll start.
Good.
You know, in socialist economies, the government runs all sorts of things. They run grocery stores, they run industries. And when those economies move back toward freedom, it's not that we suddenly stop needing grocery stores. We're not suddenly going to not need teachers anymore. We still need them. We just need to build new and improved systems where they can make a living, where they can educate children properly. And, you know, it would be crazy in America to suggest that because we have some poor people, the government should run all of our grocery stores, and yet that's the attitude I think that we've taken toward public education. Well, there are some people who can't afford a private school, there are some people who can't homeschool, therefore we need the government to run the whole education sector. We need education. There will always be jobs for teachers, there will always be jobs for people in the education sector, but we can leave a corrupted, rotten, destroyed system and move them into productive, good, positive systems where actual education is taking place.
Okay, Lynn?
Yeah, I just add a simple point. We encourage them, give them courage, connect them with like-minded teachers, supportive parents, community members, and let them know that they're not alone.
I want to add to
I don't know
that.
if most of you know, but actually Texas is a non-union state. So there are no teachers. You can have teacher organizations, and of course they try to get around all that. But and one of the things that I've been fascinated by, because I'm teaching, you know, I'm living in California for 40 years, and there's always this debate of why Texas and California have almost the identical person population. I mean, if you just look at the stats of racially, ethnically, economically, they have about the same people. But the issue is that Texas always outscores California by a good deal. And people keep asking, why is that? Why is that? And I keep saying to people in California, it's because they don't have a union. You know, my sister was a superintendent in Texas, and she had a math teacher in a rural school district, and the math teacher was okay with the white kids and not okay with the Latino kids. The kids just never made any progress. And she could call that teacher in and say, here's your scores. This is what it looks like. I'm going to send you this summer to be trained to teach mathematics to this particular group of people. And she didn't have a choice. You know, the school paid for it, but it was like, okay, you're not doing all right. I'm not saying that's happening everywhere in Texas, but it's very interesting to see the difference between a union state and a non-union state in terms of academics.
Mary,
Back in the back?
Mary, I'd like to add to that last question before you go to the next one. Teachers are in crisis. They're terrified. They have been for a long time, and most of the great ones are retiring early. What a tragedy. And they'll be replaced with indoctrinated younger ones who come out of our government-run college system. So it's really important to stand around teachers right now and to empower them. If you come to Public School Exit, they'll show you, there's a list of like 30 different types of schools where these teachers can learn how to run their own one-room schoolhouse, or they can join a network where they're training homeschoolers. There's so many options for these teachers. And you mentioned the insurance. If you come to our website, forkidsandcountry.org, there's a union exit tab, and underneath it we show the alternative liability that these teachers can get for a fraction of the cost, no politics, and they actually get double the coverage and better coverage. So there's no reason for these teachers to stay in these schools.
Right.
It's time for a teacher revolt.
Okay, great. There's someone right there. No, you're standing. You've been, yes.
Yeah, I was able to hear her okay. I don't know if the crowd did, but she's basically saying teachers are afraid and they don't know they have options and they don't know they can leave the union. Well, so when we brought our lawsuit to the Supreme Court and then another subsequent case, that was our argument. We didn't want teachers to have to pay unions. They don't have to pay them anymore. Neither do any other government workers. Why don't they know? Because the unions passed a bunch of laws because they control a bunch of the legislature, state and national. They passed a bunch of laws to make it illegal for employers to tell people their rights. So that's why it's so important that you all adopt teachers. And again, that union exit tab on our website answers the questions, everything you were just addressing. We actually help teachers walk them through these steps, and non-teachers too, government employees. Okay. No one needs to be in these unions anymore. And by the way, all 50 states are now right to work. That was part of our lawsuit too. Everybody's free. Nobody in all 50 states had to pay a union.
But you're not free if you don't know. You're not free if you don't know. That's why I say information, education, then activation.
Right.
There are groups that are outside of the system that ought to be engaged in marketing that knowledge to teachers in order for us to see the kind of turnaround that needs to take place. Mm-hmm. It will not take place when ignorance is in control.
Exactly. Okay. And by the way, in the movie we are teaching them that in the movie. We teach them that in my book, which I think there's some copies here today. So we are trying to educate them. My people perish for lack of knowledge.
Okay, Carol wants me to, okay. Where are we? There you are. Oh, good, I'm back.
Is it on? Yeah. All right. Here in Williamson County, I'm the chapter chair for Moms for Liberty here, and we recognize the burning building. And you know, we exhausted every civic avenue over the summer to get a toxic curriculum taken out of our schools, and we met a brick wall, you know, at the school board and the county and at the state. So felt the need to create something, an exit strategy for parents that are caught in the middle. They can't quite go private, but they want to get their kids out of public. And maybe they're afraid of homeschooling. A lot of parents are still terrified of homeschooling. So we sought to create a middle ground. We called it Liberty Schools. And it's Liberty Schools, a network of Williamson County homeschools. We have 2 of them 2 locations. The north location has 2 pods, is 20 kids, and the south location smaller, just starting up. However, the greatest barrier we've found to doing this model, and by the way, this model is a little bit different because we took teachers that are disenfranchised in the public school system and are tired of being chained to a toxic curriculum of indoctrinating kids, and they're tired of the heavy-handedness of the central office that gives them no flexibility whatsoever to exercise the craft of teaching. They have to follow a script. They're tired of it. They want out. So we take those teachers and we match them with parents that are similarly disillusioned with the school system and put them together and establish that beautiful partnership between the parent and the teacher. So that's what we've done. But the hardest thing to do is find a location. Because here's the thing, you would think everybody turns to go to your church. Your church is going to give you a location. They don't. It's extremely hard to find a church that will open their doors to you during the week. There's a couple different reasons. Sometimes the church just I don't want to get involved into politics, and maybe they don't understand the war that we're fighting. Other churches don't want to be targeted because some churches are also woke, as we also, unfortunately. And even within the Franklin city limits, we found out the hard way that there are some city ordinances that are hostile to educational activities in a church. And even though those ordinances can be applied discretionally, they always go against the school. So we have one of our Liberty schools, which is looking for its forever home, and it's hard to find. We're trying to help and brainstorm as much as we can, but here's the thing that's really amazing about that pod is that the teachers and the parents, they're brainstorming together. They're like, we created something beautiful here, and we're going to problem solve as a partnership, and that is amazing to see. So that's a big lead up to my question. Are there grants available? Is there assistance available to help the little one-room schoolhouse that we're trying to build? It's a seed right now. It's a seed, and it's taking root, and it's going to blossom into something amazing. And are there resources available to help this be, a city on a hill to show that this can be done, and there's help available to find locations and resources?
Right. Well,
it's a great question. It's a great question and a great opportunity. I think the word that you used, I think that is applicable here, is problem solving. The ability to look at the problem and determine what is the best way to solve it. I think if you have a network of families in your community, that's a starting point for financial support. That means looking at facilities that may be available and finding out the cost for renting it and then bringing everybody there. The other thing is talking to the business community, to those men and women who own businesses who have children, who recognize the danger that they have in the public school system, to get them to partner with you and to perhaps put investment teams together that are investing for the purpose of the school, doing fundraisers and things of that nature. So there's got to be ways that we got to get around this. And then we've got to deal with the fact that we are funding these Luciferian institutions of indoctrination. How can we pull our money out of that and put it into areas where we want it to go? That's where we need to run candidates and politicians that are of the same mindset and worldview that we have, that they get in and start making policies that support our efforts. So it's not an effort that's going to take an overnight solution. It's going to be one that's long-term, and we need to go in it for the long haul.
And when you achieve some success in political campaigning to get like-minded candidates in these decision-making positions, advocate for school choice reforms at both the state and local levels, so that your taxpayer money can be channeled more meaningfully and more sustainably to your educational choices.
Yes. There's a question right here.
Okay, yeah.
Or a comment. Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
thank you.
You wanted to say something too, Alex, right?
Yeah, Carol, please.
No, you go first, but there's someone here that is representing the local Hillsdale School, and I wanted her to speak, Sandy Wales, after. Sandy, could you come to the microphone and be ready to speak after the panel finishes commenting?
And I'd like to just add a couple quick things to that. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I can't tell you how much it warms my heart. Things like that are happening all across America, and praise God, Americans are generous, they're entrepreneurial. We can solve this, folks. We don't need the government to solve it for us. I want to say any pastor that doesn't have an extremely good reason not to help out here should hang his head in shame. The Great Commission says we are to make disciples of all nations, and we want to send a missionary to some third world country, and yet we're going to lose our own children here because we're not discipling them properly. These pastors ought to open up the doors of their church. We have a board of advisors for Public School Exit that is absolutely phenomenal. Rebecca is on it, and many other wonderful people. We have people that are working on this right now all across the country. Couple quick examples. We have a lady who's doing independent learning academies, and what they have found is a model where churches bring in revenue by opening up their doors. So we'd be happy to connect with her. They're doing it all over California, Idaho, Washington. So the churches get money, their liabilities covered, even teachers are paid, but it's still a homeschool co-op. It's an alternative, and it's cheap. We've got a college in northern Idaho that is now training one-room schoolhouse teachers all across the country to run, and obviously the financial side as well, run one-room schoolhouses all across America.
What is it called?
The college?
Yeah, no, that organization that does
Oh, Public School Exit. You can find us at publicschoolexit.com. Look at our advisory board. We're happy to connect you with any of them. Nobody's making money off of this. We're all volunteers, including me. And on the topic of school choice, I just want to add a quick warning on that. And again, on all these issues, I fully respect everybody who's fighting in the trenches with me. We agree on 99% of stuff. I just want to give you guys a real warning about school choice. Not through my choice. I was living in Sweden for most of the last decade. And about 2008, they passed a school choice measure. Same rhetoric. Oh, the money should follow the child. Parents should have choice. And it sounded so great. Everybody agreed. Then in 2011, while we were there, I saw it happen. It was a conservative government came in. They said, hey, all this public money is going to all these private schools. We need accountability. And so they said, all schools that are taking government money must teach the government's curriculum. They must all do the government's tests. No more Bibles, no more prayer. At that point, every public school or every private school except the one that teaches the aristocrats was dependent on the government money. They all overnight became government brainwash camps, and they banned homeschooling, so there'd be no exits. So like Marva Collins, the wonderful Chicago educator who I mentioned earlier, said, we've got to keep government money and government clause out of the education of our children, in my humble opinion.
The only thing I want to add to that, to the Moms for Liberty, come see me afterward. I'll give you my business card, because not only are there all those options through Public School Exit, but these churches don't have to deal with the education bureaucracy if they create it as a homeschool. And we can help you to understand that so that your churches don't have the liability issue they're worried about.
Okay, we have a couple of things, and Sandy Wells would like to tell you about the Hillsdale School and the 1776 commission part of it. And then with Mary Poplin, she's done some very important research about public schools and the effectiveness of teachers. I'd like for her to be able to say a few words about her research. And then we'll get the two people that are at the microphones, and then we'll shut down, and your lunch will be here, and we'll have some time to fellowship.
We really appreciate the honor to be here, Dr. Swain and Moms for Liberty. A couple of years ago, there's a few of us that said, we really need another option for our Williamson County schools. So we started talking to Hillsdale College. They have a full curriculum for K through 12, and we received their approval to start our school here. Well, we're hoping to open in 23. It'll be K through 5, and then each year afterwards we'll add an additional year. It is a full classical education, and what that means is there's a real strong focus on language. It's the same, rooted in the same liberal arts of the STEM courses, but there's Latin and Greek and a real focus on civic virtue, which starts in kindergarten, and moral philosophy. And the whole purpose is they want people to be able to think and speak and be able to converse within, I heard Dr. Arndt say, within the confines of the Declaration of Independence, which of course is our freedom. It's a wonderful, wonderful curriculum. The history is the 1776. What we're doing now is we're collecting signatures so that we can let the school board know in Williamson County that parents would like another option. So if you wouldn't mind, up here, we've got someone at the table. Dan, wave your hand. If you all wouldn't mind going there, if you're from Williamson County, and just signing the petition so that we can let the school board, because we do have to go before them. We hope that we get their approval, and then we'll go to the charter organization. This is a public charter school, which means there is no tuition, but we do need your support for that. So thank you. Oh. And if I could just say one more thing, because this just touched me so much. I don't know if any of you all got to see the movie, C.J. Lewis's movie, and his conversion to Christianity. When I saw that movie, if I had not become more versed in a classical education, I realized that it was because of the studies that he did under wonderful thinkers like founders and philosophers like Socrates and Aristotle that our children will be learning on as well. He would have never come to his Christianity without that, being able to think. And that's what we want to do. We want to teach our children to think on their own, not be taught what to think. So thank you, and please support us.
Okay. Thank you for taking my question. So in Nashville, there are an increasing number of charter schools, and there's lots of private schools in Nashville. As we move away from a government-run public school paradigm, in your opinion, what role? So some schools are government-funded, charter schools, like the Hillsdale School would be. What role does a government have in regulating schools? Back in 2001, I guess No Child Left Behind was passed, and there was a lot of attention to testing. And we want to test people, and then we know that some standardized tests were made easier so that we could score higher on those tests. But also, you've got the government trying to hold higher standards, but then lowering standards. What role does the state government have in regulating and holding schools accountable to any academic standard, in your opinion?
That's a very good question. I would say do no harm, number one. Government, you are to do no harm. Number two, provide a safe environment where kids are not in some kind of potential harm, and then stay out of the way.
Thank you for that question. Phenomenal. And thank you, Pastor. I would say the first place we need to go to find the answer to that question is the Bible. And the Bible defines the role of government very, very clearly. Just open up Romans 13. The job of the government is to punish evil. And God already did us the favor of defining evil: murder, rape, robbery. These things are evil. That's why our founding fathers said you have a right to life because murder is evil. You have a right to property because stealing is evil. So the job of government is to stop evil. If there is murder, rape, robbery, things like that going on in a school, then the government has the sword. The government's job is to come in and deal with that. Beyond that, I say they should have absolutely no role. Parents and teachers and communities and the people who fund the school should be able to handle that. And my big concern with the tax money that is more and more in my state, especially in Florida, is flowing to private schools and things like this, is that eventually it's going to be like the cheese in the mousetrap. Free money, and the mouse looks at the cheese and says, I wonder why there's free cheese there. Never mind, I'll eat it. And then the trap closes, and then you're stuck in the system. So I think we need to be very careful. And we just saw this with the Supreme Court ruling just a few days ago, folks. We don't have to take the injection, but if you work at a hospital that takes federal money, put your arm over, right? So where the government money goes, the government's rules follow. And it's already the case. If the government is funding a school, that school is not allowed to teach the Bible. They're not allowed to have children praying. They may be able to teach it as literature or something like that. But the Bible is the Word of God. It's not just literature. And so in my opinion, we just need to we need a separation of school and state. We need a giant wall between the two. That's my opinion. Thank you.
In the meantime, I think that to keep up with this movement of growing alternatives, especially charter schools and other school choice alternatives, we need to introduce and advocate for policies and legislation that keep up with these changes. So policies and new bills that advocate for more academic fiscal transparency, policies that opt parents in for prior consultation and parental consent to especially controversial issues, bills that parents' bills of rights. We need to support new policies as well at the same time.
I'd like to say a couple of things. If you have any doubts about what happens when the government comes in, think back to President Bush's institution of faith-based organizations where government was given to churches. And he was, through those faith-based dollars, that it made it possible for when there was a change of administration and the Obama administration came in for them to use that money to open it up, you know, to any kind of organization that claimed to be religious, because the government can't discriminate across religions. And you also saw churches that purported to be conservative at the time, and they were pastors that seemingly leaned, you know, conservative. As soon as the Obama administration went in and they started pushing the LGBT agenda and various agendas, you saw those pastors flip because they were feeding at the trough. And so that's always a danger when you take a lot of government money. So that's one thing. The other thing I'd like to say is that with charter schools and private schools, and I don't care whether they're church or schools or not, they have to be monitored, because a lot of times there's corruption, there's misuse of funds, and so there has to be a system of accountability. We don't want to have a situation where those organizations are not being watched. If they're not being watched by the people within the school, then clearly the government has a role to make sure that they're doing what they say they're doing. And so that's my position on that. And then as far as this panel, I'd like, this young man here has been standing, I'd like for him to speak, and then I'd like for Mary to talk about her research some, and then we're gonna break. You can talk to the panelists after we break for lunch. They're gonna be around for you to do that. So, please go ahead.
Good morning, and thank you so much. I'm Pastor Kendall Baker from Houston, Texas, and I just won an HISD, Houston Independent School District trustee seat. Conservative candidate, 4 of us run, 3 of us made the runoff. I beat mine. My question to you on the end there, and you, ma'am, is that our teachers' unions are out of control. They have padded the pockets of the existing liberal members of the school board, but they're not coming nowhere near me and my colleague. How do we rid the school district of these unions? You mentioned earlier, there's a way to part ways with them. They have a stronghold in Harris County. They're all on the news, all over the paper. They're friends with everybody. And so when I go home into my next meeting, in fact, I had my first meeting Thursday, you can just feel the weight. So fasting, prayer, and living right is all important when you're in this seat. But we have a big battle ahead of us, and you brought that, and so that stuck with me. What's the first step in getting rid of a loosening that grip of the power that the union has on over our district?
This is great. This is great. So at your local level, the first step, you and I have already chatted. You're already praying. You're already fasting. You're great. You need to find, you and whoever's on your team in your community, you need to start adopting teachers and find out which ones agree with you. Okay, you probably already know some that go to your church or whatever. You get a small group, a leadership group, and then I get on a Zoom call with you, and I'll train them on how to start a war room. They'll start a war room, and they'll start bringing in more teachers, and all of y'all will do that. We'll teach you how to do that. And you get, unless we can get the government to make these unions illegal, we got to fight them one at a time, right? So this is how you fight them one at a time. So so then we just train you on that. You grow your numbers, and we do it in a very covert way so the unions don't destroy what you're doing. A lot of prayer. And as you grow, you get to a certain point where you have enough numbers where you can start working on what's called a decertification effort. They only need a simple majority, 50% plus one person, to decert these unions. So we can help you with that.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a marathon. It's a marathon. It's not going to happen overnight. Men and women, we're in this to rescue the republic, and it's going to take an effort over time to break the grip.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm standing between you and lunch now. It's a really bad place. It's not that I wouldn't do it, but yeah, I'm not going to. I'm just going to tell you, there's actually, I've edited a book called Highly Effective Teachers in the Worst Schools, because one of the most important things is that whatever school you reinvent, that the teachers really know how to teach. And I can tell you that if they've gone through a teacher ed program, that's not likely right now. So they need to know how to teach reading, how to teach math, how to teach everything, geography, political science, and we studied 50 or 60 teachers over almost 10 years who worked in the poorest and worst schools, worst scoring schools in the greater Los Angeles area, and their scores week after week and year after year were exceptional. And we just studied them. And I can tell you, they are tough. They're tough. They know their curriculum really well. They know how to give a little piece at a time to kids. They know how to check it. They know how to encourage kids. So at the same time of being tough, they're some of the funniest and most encouraging teachers we ever saw. So there are some great people in some of the worst schools, and there's a lot of data about that. And I had a graduate student, Matthew Smith, who's done a study of, did a study of 20 black men who came into the California state system into college and were doing well, and he interviewed them about their experience in the public schools. And every single one of those 20 could name one, only one of them could name two, teachers who caused them to really achieve and go for college. And their stories are wonderful. Then they each nominated a friend of theirs who did not end up in college, and not one of them, when they were interviewed, could name a teacher who had made a difference in their life.
And Murray,
Pretty different.
could you give 2 examples of some of the things that the teachers did? Because I know about some of these teachers, how they were able to connect with those students.
Well, the first things they did in the first days is really to set a very safe and very organized classroom where there wasn't much going on except to, well, the first days, they often asked the students to introduce themselves. In one classroom, which I thought was probably the most successful, it was a junior high classroom, which is a tough area to teach, that she had, every student had to bring a paper bag with 3 things that meant a lot to them. Now, I'm listening to this, and I know the teacher's not a Christian, but almost every single student either had a rosary or a Bible in their bag. So and then she got to know who they were, right? And they were tough, and when she handed out rulers, she said, "These rulers are mine. They belong to me, and they're not back scratchers, and they're not things to hit your neighbor with. They're rulers, and if I see you do any of those things with my ruler, I'm going to take it away." And the punishment in this science class, junior high science class, was you didn't get to do the experiment at the end of the week if you were not up on your lessons and all sorts of things. But they were very good. The other thing is when they gave an assignment that students were to work on in the class, they never stopped moving. We never saw one of these teachers sit down. They just didn't sit. And I'm talking about classrooms that are full of 35, 40 kids, right? We're not talking about, you know, a classroom in a really wealthy school where there's only a few children in each classroom. And they just never sat down. They just went from place to place to place. One of them, only one of them wore spike heels. But there were just a lot of different things that I'm happy to send you something on it if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Mary. And let's give the panel a hand. And we have books of many of the panelists over there for sale. And lunch should be ready now, the box lunches that you signed up for. And there will be people that can give you instructions on how to get to lunch. And you can also interact with the panelists. You can interact with them right after they come off the stage, or if they're signing books, if you buy their books and you want them to sign the books. And so we will now take our break for lunch. Thank you.